Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Searching for Political Identity. It is your favorite host here, Brian Escal. Great to be with you. Thank you so much for being here. I just wrapped up a really great conversation with a guy named Jamie Miller. He is a political consultant. He's been a professional political consultant damn near his whole life. He's an author, and he's got a blog called Reasonable Arguments. And we talked about, of course, the current political landscape. Specifically, I have these, they just came up organically. We talked about Trump, Republicans, and Democrats in general. Who does he like? Who doesn't he like? Maybe for the next cycle. We talked about Bush and Gore and how things might be different if Gore had won the election. We talked about illegal immigration. We talked about abortion. We talked about Harris and the debate and why she's a weak candidate. We talked about, I can't really see because everything's crossed out, but it was really, I feel really stimulated at the end of it. And so I wasn't bored at all. And that's how I know it was a good one, when I feel energized at the end of it. Interesting man, sober man. You know, that word sober, I use it meaning rational, very, sober. I guess I don't have to explain why I used it. But is the media biased? Was the election rigged? This man had reasonable takes on a lot of interesting issues. Oh, and another big one we talked about was Citizens United. So a lot to chew on here. Phenomenal conversation, actually. And at the very, very end, talked about why it's better to go with conservatism than progressivism. Interesting. So, yeah, I got to say, this was one of my favorite conversations I've ever had. And I'm very proud to have had it. And like I said, glad that you're here and glad to be with you. So, I guess the only other thing I'll say is I have some really excellent guests coming up. So I'm very excited about what's coming down the pike here. So stay tuned for some intense and I think interesting chats to come. Not only with, for example, I'm hosting in a week the two authors of the book. Where is that book? Hold on one second. Right here. Sorry for the dead air. Anyone who's listening on audio, this book that a couple weeks ago, I hosted one of the two authors and had a really good conversation with him about the first half of it. Now that I've finished it, both authors on at the same time. We'll talk about the complicated relationship between American Jews and Israel and American Jews and the Democratic Party. And a lot to say there. And then I landed a really big guest that I won't name because I don't want to name them until the election is over. Okay, I'll give you one hint. They're running for president right now as an independent candidate. And they're really famous and they're a genius. And they agreed to do my show as soon as the election is over. So about 7 to 8 weeks. I look forward to bringing you a really cool conversation. So thanks for being here and I'll see y'all next week. I'm recording, man. Welcome.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Brian, for having me.
Yes. I'm recording and I start off by saying hello, sir, and thank you for being with me. So thank you for your time.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for your time. I am happy to join and appreciate connecting with you on X. So that was, I'm appreciative of that. And so thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion.
Me too. So tell me a little bit about yourself. I know you're a Republican. You're a professional Republican, right?
Yeah, well, kind of. I'm a former executive director for the Republican Party of Florida. I'm a veteran of the 2000 recount here in Florida, which is kind of ancient history, maybe for many of your listeners. But, we had that year more than 6 million votes cast and 537 separated George W. Bush from Al Gore. And that, of course, Florida was the pivotal state in that election to determine the winner of the presidency. So I had my own consulting firm since about 2001 and worked with Newt Gingrich's presidential campaign as a senior advisor in 2012 in Florida. Work with a lot of different topics and candidates. I've done everything from a rural bond issue for an emergency room all the way up to, a presidential campaign. So I write a blog called Reasonable Arguments that's on Substack, and I'm also the author of American Speeches That Changed History that you can find on Amazon.
So this is really your life, Republican politics.
It's my career. I don't want to say life.
Okay. Right. But it's been your career your whole life.
It's been my career for the majority of my adult life. Yes. I was married really young, 18, had kids at 21 and 23, and really became involved professionally in politics, in my late 20s.
So why Republican? Because I'm searching for political identity. I come from a progressive home. I've been, shouting from a rooftop, my voting record, all Democrats. And then I soured on Biden. I embraced Kennedy, and now I'm with Trump. It's unbelievable. That's what I've got going. But I'm still searching for my overall political identity. So
sure.
Why? So part of this conversation, hopefully, will be some guidance from you as to why Republican politics are good. So why are you Republican?
Well, I grew up in rural Florida where everyone was Democrat. I was first registered a Democrat, a lot like, it sounds like kind of a similar path that you had. In fact, my first vote for president was in the 1988 Democrat primary for Al Gore. And then 12 years later, worked for the Republican Party of Florida and played a pivotal role in George W. Bush's election against Al Gore. So I think part of that led me away from the Democratic Party is what we're seeing today, which is Democrats believe that that government is a better solution than people. And that's kind of the pivotal moment for me, was, back then we called it Hillary Care, that the government kind of taking over healthcare with Bill and Hillary Clinton after his 1992 election. So then once you become professionally involved, you kind of go with, I don't want to say the people who hire you. Sometimes you work with people you really like, and sometimes you work with people who, you sometimes don't get to choose the people who hire you. And so I've had both throughout my career, people I've been passionate about winning, and others who I'm passionate about everybody who hires me to win, but there's people you believe in more than others. So, Newt Gingrich was somebody I believed in. I really enjoyed working on his campaign. Like I said, I was a senior advisor in Florida, so I wasn't inner circle Newt Gingrich, but I enjoyed working on his campaign and believed in his philosophy of, basically, less taxes, more freedom.
Right. And people will say to that, that sounds nice for the people who have money, but what about poor people? And that's the whole progressive argument economically, right? Is that we do need government redistributing money, call it whatever you want it, and so it's been beaten into my upbringing that that's appropriate. And I understand from hearing people out that the argument is that private charities and such are much more effective, local systems. But the counter argument you would hear from a progressive is, no, we need these big overarching systems to do it. But I get it. And that's something I'm still grappling with, for sure.
I think we all grapple with it at some level or another, where, let's pick a natural disaster, for instance, which, we face every now and again here in Florida. And, that's kind of when we decide collectively as a community, taxpayers, to help those who have been damaged by, in this case, nature, to a degree in which they can't help themselves. And I think that is certainly a role for government, is to help those who can't help themselves. And, I think part of the frustration that Republicans have now is that, whether it's 10 million or 20 million illegals, over the border for the last just 4 years, and, somebody shows up here, they're illegal. Arizona's Supreme Court just yesterday said that 80,000 illegal immigrants can vote in Arizona's election. And I have a hard time when Democrats support what to me is clearly unpatriotic and a violation of our basic premise of one person, one vote. And I think they have a problem with who are citizens and where do your rights begin as a citizen, and where does somebody's rights start when they're not a citizen. I mean, I think we could have an honest conversation about that, but I don't believe that constitutional rights extend to people who are not citizens of the United States. You have human rights, you have the right, but for instance, let's say if a tourist is here, there's certain rights we don't allow tourists to have. You know, we don't just let a tourist go buy a gun or have free speech or petition our government. You know, so I'm not sure why illegal immigrants would have those rights either, including voting.
It doesn't make much sense. It doesn't make much sense, at least at a first glance, for sure. I agree with that. And it was interesting. One thing I want to go back to, you said earlier, is this concept of, because I'm starting to have these questions in my mind about professional ethics and working in politics, and, you know, being a hired gun to some degree in certain times, and how do you keep your sanity and your morals? And I guess you just do it. You have a general side of the line that you fall on, and as long as you're not really violating any of your core principles, it is what it is, huh?
Yeah, I don't know. In one particular case, and I don't want to bring up this person's name, but it was a big race, and it was somebody I truly believed in when I started the campaign. And as I moved through the campaign, I had kind of this ethical dilemma where I felt that the person was not worthy of the office they sought. And so, you kind of have this ethical dilemma. I ended up quitting that campaign over that ethical dilemma. And right or wrong, I still struggle with whether I was right or wrong, because at some level, I don't want to say I'm a lawyer because I'm not a lawyer, but at some level, you're hired to kind of see somebody through to the end or through their campaign. And I still question whether that was, kind of abandoning somebody in their time of need.
Right.
But for me at that time, it was the right decision.
Right on. Yeah, no, it's very interesting how you could, I guess the point is, it's just interesting to think about how you take a general excuse me, still have bronchitis, passion for politics, and start making money with that passion. It's just interesting how things will come up like that. So
yeah, a lot of my clients now are, more local in nature. They're more. I have two clients that are kind of environmental. We're changing a parking lot of our performing arts center into a world-class park, the Bay Park Conservancy here in Sarasota. And then I've also worked for a group trying to restore a pass that was closed by man without any federal permits. So, and then I work with some non-political folks for what I like to call reputation management. So I try to help them with their, public relations. It's kind of a little bit more behind the scenes public relations. I don't really write press releases and things for them, although I can, but it's more trying to guide them towards their PR, philanthropic, and political goals.
What are the common tips you end up giving people?
I was published, I think it was around 2008, in the Public Relations Handbook in the Crisis Communications chapter. And I still fall back on that, where, your mom was right. You can always count to 10 and before you speak. And so, and then I kind of make a joke. Well, if you're on TV, maybe you can only count to 3, right. Because dead air is not great on TV, as you well know. But that goes back to just think about what your strategic goals are before you speak, and before you take a public position on something. What are your goals with that public position? What are both the positive? I always like to look at conventional wisdom and then flip it on its head and say, okay, what's the direct opposite of conventional wisdom? And can that be a path either to success or failure? Because none of this happens in a vacuum. There's always external forces. We're about 45 days out or whatever it is from the election. Certainly there's going to be external pressures that neither campaign can control somewhere along the line in the next 45 days.
Right.
We just kind of had the second assassination a week ago of President Trump, and that's an external force that can't neither campaign can control whether it happened or not. So but you could add a hurricane in the next 45 days, or a school shooting, or
Biden being
sudden,
removed,
anything, like anything that can have an elected a positive or negative impact on an elected official and influence how they're seen as a leader.
Right, for sure. I want to bounce back to one thing you mentioned earlier before we maybe get to more of the Trump and current political landscape stuff, which I definitely want your opinion on and how it stacks up to historically for you. But what about this Gore Bush thing? How different would America be? Would it be different at all in your opinion, or is it just impossible to answer if Gore had been president? Do you think we'd be on a...
It's of course the big thing that you would see is that it would have changed who, certainly September 11th would have been different, I think, under a President Gore than under a President Bush. How it would have been different, I'm not sure. I think you would have seen the things like the Green New Deal become more prevalent sooner, earlier in this century. But I think the big difference really would have come from who would have lined up, because running for president's all about timing. And if Al Gore became president in 2000, we probably do not have a President Obama, maybe until 2020. Now, the timing for Obama would not have been the same. So certainly that then led to, the President Trump, so, I think the moment in time we are in right now, I think will be known by historians probably from 2000 at least until today as kind of the divisive presidents. I think Bush, I think Bush through Biden will all be seen as divisive presidents.
And why Bush divisive? I was a little young.
I think it has to do with I kind of now in hindsight, Bush kind of looks like this uniter, right? And so history kind of people kind of change it. But I would go back to how George W. Bush ran his reelection, which was different than what Clinton did or Reagan, because both Reagan kind of embraced the middle to win reelection. Bill Clinton embraced the middle to win reelection. And George W., during his reelection in 2004, decided to turn right and embrace registered conservative voters, a lot of church-going voters, and he governed accordingly. And then Barack Obama followed George W. Bush's lead in his reelection, and instead of embracing the middle, embraced the left. And so you're kind of seeing this same thing with this 2024 election, with Donald Trump embracing kind of the right with his VP pick of J.D. Vance, and Kamala Harris embracing the left with her pick of Walz. So I don't know that this next 4 years is going to be any less divisive.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, I think you could say that the Republican National Committee, that party that they threw, was pretty middle. It also had a middle feel to it. So they're trying to straddle that, I would say. And JD theoretically comes from the populist left, right? But,
and Trump is
culturally, JD is on the right these days. So I agree with your statement. But it's also true, I think, that they're trying to play it both ways a little.
I think Trump is running a different campaign in 2024 than he ran in 2020. He certainly is embracing more moderate positions on things like marijuana, abortion, unions.
Right.
So if he's able to pull that out and he governs that way, I think he could be seen as kind of a break in this divisive moment in history. However, I do think that there's one underlying current that needs to be changed if we are in fact going to break this cycle of divisiveness, and it's the Citizens United U.S. Supreme Court case, where each and every politician in the country, whether you're a county commissioner, mayor, or running for president, everybody can at almost every level of government can kind of, depending on your state, depending on the exact rules, but they basically can become their own political party if they have one or two rich people who decide to support them. And so whether that's a county commissioner or whether that's somebody running for president, and that's not, while I don't know that you can take money out of politics, I certainly think that these third party groups, these independent expenditure groups, need to be reined in. I've always believed, when I first got involved casually with politics in the late 80s, was I always believed that a politician, one of the first letters to the editor I ever wrote was about politicians should be able to take as much money as anybody wants to write them, as long as it goes into their campaign account and as long as they report it. Make that politician stand up. If they want to take money from, in Florida, a big deal is U.S. Sugar, right? So the U.S. Sugar is down near the Everglades. People have very strong opinions about U.S. Sugar. They're a huge donor in the state. And so if you want to take $5 million from U.S. Sugar, if you're a politician, stand up and say you stand with U.S. Sugar, and that's why you took the money, because you have similar beliefs as they do. And not, hey, U.S. Sugar puts money into this account that gets run through another account, and then it ends up being spent on TV or mail on your behalf, right? And so, and that's happening at every level of government. It's happening on both sides. It's not a Republicans are doing it and Democrats aren't, or vice versa. Both parties are, in my opinion, they're operating within the law. I'm not saying anybody's breaking the law. I just think that we need to change that law so there's more transparency.
It's so interesting that that issue could be a bipartisan issue, and so important. Thank you for bringing it up. And having recently gone to law school, you realize, like, okay, the court that decided that was operating with sober principles, and they're applying those principles and seemingly trying to have a conservative, if you will, outcome, in the sense that, hey, the logic says that these corporations are actors in terms of speech and should have the right to do as much as they want. And we, without getting into the ins and outs of the law itself, the idea being that it put the money, though, in the shadows.
Well, and the number of foreign owners who own American companies who then donate to American politicians, to me, is something that we certainly need to look at. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not pointing fingers at one party or the other. It's the system. Both are operating within that system. But, we have laws against taking foreign contributions, but there's a huge loophole when, foreign donors own American companies, and those American companies then donate to politicians.
So, yeah. So you're not a corporate Republican then. So they say.
I am. I'm all for corporate America, and for corporate having a voice. I just think it should be done in a more transparent manner.
Yeah, that's good. So tell me about Trump, and is he as much of a bizarre figure, or is he just a symptom growing from the environment we had? What's your take on this man?
Well, I've had one conversation in my life with Donald Trump. It was in 2015, about 2 weeks prior to him running for president. He was here in Sarasota, and I did advance for him for that event. And I found my conversation to be very intelligent. I found him to be a very intelligent, engaged in that conversation. There was no reason for him to be engaged with me behind, the scenes. And, I was just a guy trying to make sure his security guy knew where he needed to go and things like that. So there was absolutely no reason for him to engage me in conversation, but he chose to. And once he realized that I was a campaign professional, I thought the questions and the dialogue that we had with one another was probably one of the most intelligent I've had in my life. So that's my focus group of one for about 30 minutes, 9 years ago. So, that's my experience with him. And so, I think that he leans into his celebrity. I think I was one of the first people outside of The Simpsons to predict his presidency. But I predicted he would run against Barack Obama in 2012 and win due to his celebrity. I was quoted in Variety magazine saying something along those lines. And so I think that we, as Americans, we like celebrities, and I think he leans into that. And I think, I think kind of his persona, the people who don't like him, they don't like the celebrity part of it. They don't like that he, he's really kind of, if you know your presidential history, he's kind of almost an 1880s style, yellow journalism politician. He's not the first character that we've had in our history who says outlandish things to gain press, right? And so I think most of his supporters take some of that outlandish rhetoric and suggest, hey, we know he doesn't mean that, and everybody else takes it literally. And where does he personally believe? I don't know, but I do know that he ran the country for 4 years, and he did not run it in a bizarre way. He did not destroy it.
Exactly.
And I think that, the proof is in the pudding, so to speak.
That's where I am. And when you combine the results of the Biden presidency with, as I say, the process that the Democrats took to get to Harris, which was just ugly and unfortunate and bad.
Well, I also think it was planned and orchestrated. I wrote in my blog, Reasonable Arguments, last October that Democrats would switch horses the week following the RNC convention. They would wait for Trump to make his move for vice president and then dump Biden. And that's exactly what they did. Right. I thought it was pretty apparent for months that that's what they were going to do, almost a year.
Right.
That's what they were going to do. And, I was probably the least surprised person in America that they did it. I thought they would at the very least, go to their convention and give Democrat voters a choice, but they didn't even bother to do that, which I think is unfortunate for the country, no matter the outcome of November's election.
Right. So what do you think about Harris? I mean, she's a victim in a sense of the circumstance in a weird way, right? I mean, you almost feel a little bad for her.
I don't. She chose to do this. I don't feel like she's qualified to be commander in chief. I've run into very few people who make an argument to suggest that she is.
Right.
Their arguments are solely based upon their hatred for Trump, and I understand,
and excitement about identity politics. Oh, first woman of color.
Yeah, I think there's a good bit of that. But if you ask people to name her accomplishments, they are few and far between, whether they're from California or as vice president or as a U.S. senator. She really does not have much. And that's why when she has her rallies, she speaks for an average of 20 minutes. Right. And she talks in these huge platitudes of, and really doesn't say much of anything. And the policies that she has presented to the American people are basically vote buying schemes, and she has no way to pay for them.
Right. Yeah. The biggest thing for me was these long form interviews. Kennedy was doing them. That's what attracted me to him. I said, okay, this guy I respect. Maybe I don't agree with everything, but look at his vision, look at his tone. That's my guy. And Trump started doing the long form interviews, and I said, okay, I can respect this. Okay. And I don't see that happening with her. I wouldn't think that's going to be happening. And
it's unfortunate that the American people know so little about her, and she's polling, whether you're looking at national polls, 1 or 2 points above Trump, or state by state electoral college polls where the race is a coin flip at this point.
You see, right. It really says it all about the hatred for Trump. And so why he leans into his celebrity, but he also leans into controversy so effectively. But the question is, like, who started it, right? Between him and the media, isn't it?
I don't, that'd be an interesting case study to see who quote started it, what came first, the chicken or the egg, right?
Yeah. Well, people say either way, they say he should rise above. That's the point. They say your leader should rise above, and then the question, should he fight fire with water? He fights it with fire. He's so good at it. He's hilarious. He's effective. It's hard to say what his.
I like to say, in Florida, we had a term for North Florida politicians. We call them pork choppers, because they would go to any pork chop dinner to try to get votes. And my first political mentor was a well-known pork chopper named Tom Slade. And we used to say that, oh, Boss Slade, he would lead us through fire. Now, by God, he sets half of them, but he will lead us through. And I think that a lot of people who support Trump feel the same way.
Yeah.
you know, that yes, he sets half the fires, but he sees us through. And I
Right.
don't think that people feel the same way about Harris.
Sure.
I've written there's three phases of supporting Kamala Harris. It's excitement, relief, and regret.
Mm.
And I think that we're probably in the relief stage. And certainly she ended her debate. And, you know, always when you're talking about a debate and how people, the most scripted portion of the debate are your opening statement and your closing statement. So this was scripted on her part. The opening statement was we. She tied herself to Joe Biden. And, you know, I think she used we 6 or 8 times in her opening statement. And then in her closing statement, you know, she said the quiet part out loud, you know, I'm, you know, not Joe Biden and I'm not Donald Trump. And that's basically her campaign is I'm neither Joe Biden nor Donald Trump. And I don't think that's good enough to be president.
Right. Me neither. Exactly. So what a disastrous situation. So what role do you think Biden had in this sequence of events? Do you think he was in on it and he did his part exactly like they wanted him to, or do you think he was going rogue for a while?
I think he was a stooge. I think they played him, and he at the end, you know, I think that he probably is not capable of running the country, and they're hiding him. And
Sure.
you know, they didn't do him the disservice and dishonor of actually removing him as president. But it's pretty clear that he's not the person running the country. I don't know that anybody has a handle on who is. It's certainly not Kamala Harris. And so the question becomes, if Harris becomes president, who's going to be running the country? Because
Right.
it's neither Biden nor Harris right now.
Yeah, that's when for me, it's a huge part of it. The conviction and belief that Trump at least is in charge. You said when you met him, you were very impressed, and I find him very impressive with the long form interviews. Maybe he doesn't have the depth and breadth and the brilliance that Kennedy has, but he's certainly got his own brilliance. Trump, super talented, super sharp. You could tell he's been following world events for a long time and has strong beliefs. And it's like Hamilton, you know, Burr, who are you going to support? You know, and he stays on the fence forever. And I just couldn't stay on the fence forever. At a certain point, it's like you said, the guy starts fires, but he'll lead you through them. And I believe that. And I got to give it to that guy in this situation.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to look at it is, you know, the people who believe in him believe that he's going to lead us through the fires and trials and tribulations that our country is going to face in the next 4 years, both known and unknown. You know, there's certain things on the horizon. We know Russia and Ukraine is going to remain a problem for a little while. You know, the conflict in Gaza is not going away anytime soon. You know, the chances of China, North Korea, and Russia joining forces and becoming a real problem is something that we must face. And, you know, I think that Trump does a good job of keeping those three kind of off balance where, you know, the Biden Harris administration seems to have ignored these problems and they've done nothing but get worse. And I don't think there's going to be anything other than the ignoring of these foreign affairs under a President Harris should she win.
Yeah. That was the other thing I was thinking. It's just, well, it's the same point, really. This confidence or this fear, really, that things have gotten pretty ugly under Biden globally, and people will say, "Oh, you're being unfair," but I'm sorry, you gotta judge the president by what happens, at least on foreign policy, while they're in office, and it hasn't been positive.
No, it has not.
Scary. It's a little scary.
No, it's a scarier world today than it was. You know, we have China and Russia ships down in the Gulf of Mexico off of Cuba. And so there's a lot more danger in the world today than there was 4 years ago. We're less safe in our own communities due to the failed domestic policies of this president and vice president. The border czar has been a complete failure. And that was her one job during her vice presidency and completely failed. And, you know, and they're almost proud of it. They're almost proud of it. And that's the real scary part is that, you know, they're proud that Arizona now is going to have 80,000 voters who are illegal immigrants who are going to be allowed to vote. That was just decided this last week by the Arizona Supreme Court. they're proud that a small town in Ohio is now over a 30% population Haitian, just because, leaders can rent housing to these folks. And so, like it's not something to be proud about. And it's made our communities more dangerous. Every community in America is more dangerous now than it was 4 years ago. And Harris is not going to do anything to fix it. In fact, it will get worse.
Yeah, no, I'm glad we came back to illegal immigration, because I wanted to talk about it. This idea that we're going to deport to the maximum extent possible all illegal immigrants, even, I'll be honest, it makes me go, oh man, is that a little harsh? But then you listen to the arguments from the conservative side, and it's like, no, man. Well, when you get to the bottom of it, it's like basic fairness. There are people that have been waiting in line, so it's just not right. It is a crime, and so deportation is the appropriate remedy. I mean, that is ultimately, I don't know how you counter that. I mean, with emotion, with sadness. I mean, because people, you don't want to be the person who doesn't support people bettering their lives. And certainly immigration has enriched the country over the years in so many ways. But you hear these arguments about, and certainly I don't agree with giving them the vote. So at a certain point, you go, damn, is Trump right about this too? Is mass deportation, in fact, the very thing that is appropriate?
The borders are based on a memo from Homeland Security, the Department of U.S. Homeland Security. The border czar has lost 300,000 unaccompanied children who crossed the border alone and are whereabouts unknown. These are minor children. That's the population of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's the population of North Las Vegas, Nevada. 300,000 kids. And even Homeland Security suggests that they are either dead, enslaved, or being sex trafficked. 300,000 people children that this administration has failed. Even if you're talking about, like we led the show off, even if we're going to talk about, protecting those who are most vulnerable in our society, and that there's a role for government for that, right, wouldn't that be the children? And they don't seem to care at all that there are 300,000 missing children who have crossed that border unaccompanied. And there's no acknowledgement that, number one, outside this memo from Department of Homeland Security, that number one, it even exists, or that they're even going to try to fix it, or they have a plan to stop it from happening in the future. So just the amount of failure with this administration and border czar Harris it takes my breath away. Quite frankly, it is dumbfounding to think that somebody who has failed so incredibly bad, these children, is actually in the running for president of the United States is unspeakable.
Right. Up for a promotion. It doesn't seem right. So we touched on world events. Do you have anything to tell me about this concept of globalism and nationalism and how that's playing a role? What your thoughts on those two words?
See, that sounds like that sounds like a big college education type of thing. I think that there's I think that a lot of countries are starting to see the error of their ways with immigration. And, too much has happened too fast. They don't know who they are. You don't know who when immigrants came here in the past, there was at least an acceptance or a expectation that they would be allegiant to the United States of America.
So we're talking about different types of immigrants. In the past, they were more easily assimilated, and now it's not happening as much.
It doesn't appear to be, but I'm hopeful that it will happen. Back to your question about rounding up people, and the practical application of that is difficult, right? We're talking about 20 million people. How do you what's the practical application of rounding up 20 million people? And those are just who showed up in the last 4 years. And and finding them and deporting them, and what's the process for that? What's the cost of that?
Right.
How do you employ enough people to do that?
Mhm.
Right. And so I think the devil's in the details on a lot of that. But certainly those who are here illegally should not be allowed to vote, and should, if they commit a felony, should be deported. Like at that point, they should be deported. And so at the very least, we should have systems in place to deport people who are committing crimes here. And it
And
doesn't
I actually, so in my newfound family, if you will, I use that term very loosely, followers on Twitter since I've embraced Trump, I tried to find something that I could still criticize Trump on, because I'm like, wait a minute, am I just a loyalist now? So I tweeted about immigration, and I said, look, and again, I'm pretty surface level, not that knowledgeable, but I said, if you're an illegal immigrant and you came here to work and you're law abiding, you shouldn't be deported unless you've committed a crime. And they're like, no, the crime is illegal entry. So it's tough. I didn't mean to throw you off your game there, but
no, it's it's sort of, like the small town in Ohio, Haitians are eating dogs and cats. It's like, well, whether that's happening or not, we certainly have documented a 911 call and pictures of Haitians killing geese in the public pond, right? So you're talking about a migratory bird being hunted out of season without a license, which are all federal felonies. They're
Right.
all federal felonies. So, should we deport people over that? I think
I'm with
so.
you. I'm with you. And the point being is that you should have a strong posture. And a Trump guy is a guy who represents a strong posture, a strong system. I work on a job site. You don't have open borders. You have a fence, and you enforce the rules. And so whether we're talking the details being so important, the point is the posture is from a guy like Trump, as opposed to a Biden or Harris or any machine Democrat, is very different. And it might be hard for someone like me who's a little sensitive and grew up on the left and doesn't want to be the deport them all type of guy, but maybe you do need that strong posture.
I agree with you. Here in Florida, you may not remember, but when Haiti was having their issue with gangs and gang violence, there was a big push, and the federal government gave Haitians a green light to get in boats and come to Florida. And Ron DeSantis, our governor, took a stand and said, no, if you come to Florida shores, we are turning you around. We will do it as a state. We are not allowing you in our state. And you know what happened? Nobody came.
Right.
Nobody came to Florida. And so I think the posturing, I think you are correct. Once people say, hey, listen, we're not letting you in, a good people quit risking their lives to get to the southern border to cross if they know they're going to be turned right around.
And that's what I think I start to realize. And people say, I can't separate Trump, the character, the performer, from the person. And I go, I can. And maybe it's just maturity. But I go, I'm starting to see that when you're a leader, posture is so important. And so this is really interesting. I'm so glad you brought up DeSantis, because that was my next little note here. Let's talk about how you feel about the next crop of Republicans, DeSantis. And he very much is that same way. Very strong, very clear, very, very centered, and leading. I think he's a great leader.
We are very proud to have had Governor DeSantis during, the dark days of COVID. We were open for, like most of the country, we closed for 3 to 4 weeks completely.
Yeah.
But we were also one of the first states to open, certainly to restaurants serving outside, and golf courses were open. We knew very quickly. I think most people knew. Grocery stores certainly knew, because they were the ones getting sued here in Florida. Publix is our local grocery store chain here, and it's the most sued company in Florida for slip and fall. And so I know that they had some level of, the employees I know who work for Publix, not management, have told me that, within a month, Publix pretty much knew that if you weren't within 6 feet of somebody who had COVID for more than 3 minutes, that you weren't exposed to COVID. And so anytime an employee came up with COVID, they would go and look and see if they had contact with customers within 6 feet for more than 3 minutes. And if that if that employee did not speak to any customers, they didn't let people know because it was just simply you weren't exposed to it, and they knew you weren't exposed to it. So we knew some very basic things about this virus very soon, that you could make some general assumptions based upon the 100 years of flu that we've been testing, right? That if you're outside, you're less likely to get it. If you're in the sunshine, you're less likely to get it. We knew that from the 1918 flu outbreak, when they took hospital beds outside so people would get sun and heal quicker. So there's everybody said follow the science, and yet people turn their back on that very same science to try to control the public, especially in places like California and New York and more liberal states. So we were very proud of Governor DeSantis. He's been a very logical, steady hand on the wheel during certainly the last 4 years with this difficult president. The question I think that you are asking is, what is his path to potentially becoming the next Republican nominee for president? And it's not easy. Number one, it's not easy to become the nominee for president, as we saw this last time. But you also have Florida's elections kind of are off-year elections. So he's term limited out in 2026. And so from 2026 to 2028, he needs to figure out a path that keeps him in the national limelight if, in fact, he's running for president in 2028. So, so we'll see what he decides is that path.
If Trump could potentially bring him into the fold if he wins.
That could happen. And, of course, if Trump were to win, people would think that J.D. Vance is, kind of that first person.
Right.
As a general rule, vice presidents don't win presidency. Also, as a general rule, should they win presidency, they only serve one term.
Interesting.
So
we are in a time of exceptions, maybe.
We are in a different time. I always say that, look towards Ohio this year, and if Harris starts closing in Ohio, then Trump could be in trouble. Ohio has picked the president that's been the bellwether state since 1892, except for 3 years. 1944, FDR lost Ohio and won the presidency. In 1960, JFK lost Ohio and won the presidency. And in 2020, Trump won Ohio and lost the presidency. So, and you have a U.S. Senate race there in Ohio, Senator Sherrod Jones, who is spending almost more money than he is spending more money than any Democrat in the country. And so there could be kind of a tail wags the dog, sort of reverse coattails or whatever term you want to use, that could help Harris there because you have a strong Democrat incumbent U.S. Senator spending a lot of money on his reelection. So, but having said that, Trump has an opportunity in places like New Hampshire and Michigan. The polls aren't great there, but I think that he can potentially close. New Hampshire has a really late primary for governor. I think it was September 8th. So, and the more moderate Republican won that nomination and is well positioned to win the governor's mansion in New Hampshire. So, Trump could benefit from the tail wagging the dog there, although history would suggest that Ohio stays Republican and New Hampshire stays Democrat. But I think that those are kind of two interesting states that your listeners might want to keep an eye on that are kind of outside the conventional wisdom.
Very interesting. I have 3 more questions for you. The first one's a 2-parter, and we've already started down it. But do you have any other Republicans that you like? JD will be in the mix. DeSantis will be in the mix. Any other 1 or 2? And then same question on the Democrat side. Do you like anyone over there for next time?
Yeah, I think Joe Manchin would have been a good choice for Democrats this time from West Virginia. I think he has his finger more on the pulse of what's best for the country. I liked Mike Pompeo as well. He came and spoke here in Sarasota a year or 2 ago, and I got to spend a little bit of time with him. Very impressive man. Of course, he oversaw the Abraham Accords when he was Secretary of State, and so has major foreign policy victories under his belt. as well as being a member of the U.S. House. So I felt like he had kind of the credibility, or has the credibility to be a potential presidential candidate. I think Governor Huckabee from Arkansas has a real opportunity, probably by 2028, to continue to build her foundation to be a potential president. Of course, Nikki Haley, while today is seen as too moderate to win a Republican primary, should Trump lose, I think people will start to reconsider how far right we want to be in presidential politics, and maybe be more right in U.S. House and U.S. Senate type politics, but maybe move a little bit more towards the middle, or, like I like to say, reasonable.
Yeah, it's like she's not that middle, but just at least in one or two issues and in tone.
Well, I think that she had the right tone on the abortion question.
Right, exactly.
And it's here in Florida, there's a big abortion ballot measure. So Democrats are trying to exploit that as much as they can politically around the country.
It's basically all they have.
I think Trump handled that question well at the debate.
So do I. And he's been handling it well too. But the problem is he's the guy who got the court to change Roe. And so, if you want to call that a problem politically, that's the dynamic.
Yeah. And too many people, or more than a generation of people, have thought of Roe as a woman's right issue rather than a states' rights issue. So I think, like the president, that it's a states' rights issue. And, but Democrats are exploiting it to their political benefit, just as probably they should.
Right. Right. Okay. Here's the next question. 2 more to go. Tell me your wisdom. What are your reflections on the 2020 election? I don't call it rigged. And again, I don't really do my homework. I'm not a journalist. I'm just a surface level guy who pays attention to the news. And what I say is it was unfair. I do use the word unfair. It was irregular, certainly. It was a weird election, and there was a lot of odd things. And so what are your thoughts?
So, I always say that if we're going to just talk about election fraud, that election fraud is around. It is finite. A lot of people don't want to believe that it's finite. It is. But it is also a crime where if you get away with the crime, the evidence is erased. And it's pretty simple. If you cast an illegal ballot, and that ballot is counted as a vote, you're never going to take that vote out of the pile. And so the illegal ballot, the evidence is erased. And so it's a very hard crime to catch people at. I believe that we should live stream everywhere ballots are stored, delivered, cast, counted, collected, and canvassed. And so I think all that should be live streamed. I think we have a responsibility, whether there was fraud or not fraud. It's kind of like Walmart having the greeter out there and seeing shoplifting drop because people say, hey, welcome to Walmart, right? If people are being watched, they are not as likely to commit a crime. And so, and I do think that the crime that exists is probably paid poll workers who are paid by the Division of Elections, who are hired for a day to work in a precinct, and they decide that they are going to cast extra ballots. And I think there's some things that we can do inside the precinct to make sure that doesn't happen. One would be going to, and your listeners who are Trump supporters are not going to like this, but electronic workbooks. And the reason why you go to electronic workbooks instead of paper, where people sign in, is that the poll worker cannot keep track of who voted, who did not vote, and what their signature looks like. And so in many, many jurisdictions, the paper that people sign in on literally has their signature on file beneath the line. So if you're going to try to copy a signature, there it is. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not in every jurisdiction. It depends on the state, the county, and what type of voting systems they use and all of those sorts of things. But it still happens in a lot of areas. And so, and I would also encourage your listeners who are veterans to sign up to poll work. I dare people to try to steal an election in front of the men and women who saw their colleagues fight and die for our right to vote. And it's not fair to ask our veterans for another day of service or volunteerism, but I do think that would be helpful. And so I think if nationally veterans groups encourage their members to sign up to poll work as employees, you would see that, listen, the fraud either exists or it doesn't, but we have a responsibility to ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, and the rest of the world to prove that we have free, fair, and transparent elections, and the right person who is sitting as the leader of the free world earned the job with our votes.
Right. Absolutely. And more so than fraud, in terms of literal fraud, in terms of the votes, what about the media environment? And this is my last question, which is, tell me your thoughts on, is the media environment as biased as I think it is, and it appears to be? And if so, why? Tell me a little bit about that. But in the sense that the election was unfair, that COVID was such an unusual event, and the way the Hunter Biden laptop story was suppressed, like when you add all of that together and the way it was reported, did
The
it
Russian
feel,
dossier, all of those things,
all
right?
of that, did it
The
feel,
governor of Pennsylvania broke Pennsylvania election law and decided we're sending mail-in ballots to every voter, right?
Yeah.
That was an election. That's election fraud that the governor of Pennsylvania, committed in 2020. And
under
every
the
court,
guise, I don't want to use the word guise, but under the pretext of doing the right thing in terms of COVID. So it was a strange election. That's what I say. It was
but
unfair.
the courts literally threw their hands up and said, "Oh, the governor can do that." When the governor clearly cannot create election law in their state without the legislature's approval, and that he did not have it. And so that is fraud.
And it was celebrated in the media. And it was celebrated in the media, right?
Right. And the Arizona Supreme Court just this week saying 80,000 illegal immigrants can vote in Arizona. That is fraud. That is diminishing mine and your vote. And it should not be allowed in a free society. Yeah. And we don't let tourists come vote. I live in Sarasota, Florida. We have a lot of tourists. We don't let Germans fly here on election day and vote. Why would we let somebody who's here illegally vote? Like, I don't see the difference. Yeah. And so between a tourist and an illegal immigrant voting, why don't we just open up and say, hey, if you live in London, why don't you vote in our election?
Come on down and vote.
Right. Why not? Why not? Yeah. Well, let everybody vote in the American election. Yeah. So it makes no common sense. It makes no legal sense. It makes no election sense, other than Democrats have gotten so emboldened that they know they can get away with allowing illegal immigrants, people who are here illegally, to vote, non-citizens. And why wouldn't we allow any non-citizen to vote across the entire world? Send them a ballot and let them vote. Yeah. Let them vote in whatever state they choose. Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, it makes no sense. I don't think I answered your question. No. So the question was media. Our media has always been biased. So it's whether it was, people don't want to look at Edward R. Murrow and Walter Cronkite and those types of media stalwarts as being biased. But the truth of the matter is, even those folks chose what to go on the air, right? And so just through that bias, they were choosing what was important for Americans to hear. And if they didn't choose for it to go on the air, it didn't go on the air. And so, so it's kind of a revisionist history that we had this, golden age of a fair and unbiased media. It's always been biased. And
that's why it's so interesting that we have the podcast ecosphere now, because everyone's got a voice.
Well, and everybody can write a blog, and everybody can have their opinion on Facebook, even though we're learning more and more that those social media, they suppress views that they don't want out in the public as much. And so, it's not, you have the right to free speech, but they don't have a legal
not reach free speech, not reach.
Make you reach it, right? Like if you want to get it out there, you have a right to free speech, but you're going to have to pay to advertise it, on Facebook, And so, I mean, all of my political clients, we do things organically on Facebook, but we completely stopped paying Facebook, because they suppress so much of it.
Right. Yeah, so it's interesting because yes, there's the editorial function of a mainstream media. That's valid. I mean, it has to happen. I mean, by nature. I mean, there has to be someone choosing what goes on a program. So the question, I guess, is, has it become excessive or different or much more foul in recent years, in your opinion?
Well, I think you have certainly there's a hatred of Donald Trump within the mainstream media like we haven't seen in a very long time. Presidents seem to have been respected in the past in our media, regardless of party. And that certainly is not the case here. And it's unfortunate that they've, diminished their own careers, their own voices. For people like you and me, it's great because more people are tuning into your podcast,
right,
to listen to alternative views. I like to call them reasonable arguments, right?
Right.
And so, to different views that are, I don't think you've said anything here that's completely out of the mainstream, nor have I.
Right.
It might be,
it just wouldn't get on air on CNN or MSNBC.
Right. You don't see it very often. Certainly not on MSNBC ever.
Right.
And it's funny because Joe Scarborough was a friend of mine in the late 90s and early 2000s, and he was a very conservative congressman from North Florida, along the lines of Matt Gaetz. He was that conservative.
So what happened to that guy?
And he just bought into the media, the media elitism of New York, and over the last 20 years. And he went with, I guess he chose his paycheck over his.
Well, that is the dynamic, isn't it? Elitism versus populism.
Right.
And Trump somehow, and people can't fucking believe it, the guy who pisses in golden toilets became a symbol of populism. They can't understand. They can't believe it.
Right.
And they don't believe it.
Well, they don't understand it because they think that everybody should fall in line with them because they in their minds they're giving people money and a path to, I always call it a path to serfdom, but they think it's, the path is, laid with golden bricks, but it's not. And it's just a shame that the entire Democratic Party is just not in touch with society, except for probably abortion and marijuana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. And they're the people, they do, and it's a perfect place to close out, where which ideology is right? Which ideology is better for the common American? Because that's what we're talking about. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any complete right. As Americans, if we had a choice, in national elections, we would probably split our ticket between, president, U.S. Senate, and U.S. House. We like for the government to be imbalanced. We don't want one party in charge of it all, for the most part. And so, that's not exactly how elections are run, and they're not exactly how they turn out, especially in the U.S. Senate with only a third of U.S. senators up every 2 years. So, it'll be interesting. I believe that, I side with conservatism because if we're wrong on the things that we may be wrong about, those things will still be changed in the future. For instance, I like gay marriage, right? I was not a super advocate of gay marriage, but I was an advocate for end of life care and end of life rights for the gay community back as early as the mid to late 90s, at the beginning of my career. And the reason why, my parents both worked for hospice, and they saw firsthand, very conservative people, my parents, but they saw firsthand where couples who were in gay marriages, for lack of a better term, they had built finances together, houses together. People forget that, like in the early, like even in the last part of the century, a gay couple couldn't go and get a home loan together. One got the loan and the other one lived there. And so when someone died in that relationship, oftentimes the family would come in and, for lack of a better term, steal from the other partner who helped build a life. But because the assets were in one name, the family came in and courts would allow that to happen. And there was no question that was wrong. And, and I think I think the gay community kind of made it about marriage. If I felt like they could have gotten those rights much sooner in our society if they had made it about end of life care and end of life rights versus this word marriage. But, But even though conservatives, may have been wrong on that, 10 or 12 years later, it got fixed. So it wasn't right for those 10 or 12 years. The problem with progressives, if they're wrong, there's no fixing it.
They don't count to 10.
There's no fixing it. There's no counting to 10. If they are wrong on illegal immigration,
the country's changed forever.
The horse is out of the barn, right? Yeah. So that's why I think people should vote more conservative or more Republican, because I'm not going to say we're right about everything, but when we're wrong, it can still get fixed. Progressives, when they're wrong, it just doesn't get fixed. It's broken forever.
Right. Brilliant conversation, man. I thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other parting words you feel inclined to leave me with?
If you liked what you heard, you can reach me on Substack at Reasonable Arguments, and I've written a book, American Speeches That Changed the World. It's got 20 speeches from all walks of the political spectrum. So you can find that on Amazon.
I'm going to go do that right now. And I think I'm going to probably call this episode Reasonable Arguments. Great theme, great work. And I'll check out your Substack as well, man.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I look forward to next time if you so choose.
Absolutely. So do I.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Yep. Bye.